Good morning. So how's everybody doing? Anybody awake out there? It is Thanksgiving week here in the U.S. So I assume that a lot of people may be taking this entire week off. I'm going to take tomorrow off, and then Thursday and Friday, and ZBrush a turkey. I'm going to ZBrush it with all the fixins. It's going to be incredible. So I hope you guys are doing well. So thank you guys for tuning in. So welcome back to AskZBrush Live here on Twitch. So if you guys are unfamiliar with ZBrush Live, this is Pixologic's Twitch channel here, where we show a whole bunch of stuff. Have a great lineup of people that just go through and sculpt in ZBrush. So really amazing group of artists and stuff that we have showing up and doing stuff for us. So here's today's schedule. Just going to get this out of the way and then some announcements, and then we'll jump into some AskZBrush stuff here. So Shane's class this afternoon has been postponed. So it has been postponed, so Shane will not be going on today. And then on the 22nd, we have Ashley and then Victor Marin on the 23rd. So a lot of new faces in our lineup as well. If you guys are interested in becoming a presenter on ZBrush Live, you can just go to ZBrushLive.com, and then you can scroll down, and there's this nice Creatives Apply Here button. And you can click this, and this will allow you to fill out an application to fill one of the many slots that we have here on ZBrush Live, our Twitch channel here. Also, I wanted to point out here that we have a new podcast up, and this podcast is pretty awesome, so I definitely recommend checking it out. And then in addition to that, we have all our replays for Twitch. We have the AskZBrush stuff that was put up last week, and all sorts of other things. So even if you're not watching it live, you can always go to ZBrushLive.com and catch up on anything you missed. So lots of good stuff throughout the page there. So this is AskZBrush. This is the AskZBrush version of ZBrush Live here. So what we do for AskZBrush is we have a hashtag, and the hashtag is AskZBrush. And just log into Twitter and just type in hashtag AskZBrush and ask a question. And on a weekly basis, I'll go through these and look at the questions that are asked. And if I can answer any of them in a simple video, I will go ahead and do that. And then these will be put up on our YouTube channel here. They'll also be on ZBrushLive.com. And so we have a bunch of these videos that have already been created. So they're all containing answers to various questions that have been asked on Twitter. So we have a playlist with 200 videos, and then we have another one, which was volume 2, which is up to 31 videos now. So lots of information, especially if you are new to ZBrush, or maybe you have a specific question. If you just do a search, Ask ZBrush, and then the question or keywords you're looking to try to find answers on, and it's highly likely that we've already gone through and made a short video answering those questions. So a lot of information on that. And if you don't find the question or something that fits what you're looking for, definitely just use that hashtag AskZBrush on Twitter, and we'll try to get that answered for you. Now, in addition to AskZBrush, we also have our support site, so support.pixologic.com. And don't hesitate to fill out a support ticket. So this is another great way to get information on how stuff works. Maybe you think you found a potential bug, so submit a ticket. So if you're having any issues, instead of, sometimes going just to social media and voicing your opinion on these issues, it helps us if you submit a ticket through our support site, and this will allow us to work back and forth with you to help diagnose and potentially figure out what is causing the issue you're having, and then we can resolve it in a future release. In addition to just the support site itself, there's also a knowledge base, which is an FAQ, and in here there's various information that has been asked a bunch, and so in here you have some different things that your answer may already be established and answered in here as well. So a few ways you can go through and try to find information you're looking for. In addition to this, we also have our forums, which is ZBrushCentral.com, and in here there is a thread, if you go to the classic mode here, where we have a support forum as well. It's in our main site here. And you can ask questions in here for information as well, and our community is very helpful. So a lot of times that it will get answered by someone else that may have ran into that problem before, and they have the solution and how to fix it. So if you guys have any questions today, just please put them in the chat, and I can go through and answer them live. Hopefully you guys start putting those in. If not, you're just going to see me go into a multitude of tangents. I'm just going to go on all sorts of stuff, and you're going to get an hour's worth of stuff that may not be what you asked for, but it's going to happen. So I'm going to start off today while you guys are getting your questions together, and I want to talk about nanomesh. So we're going to hop over to ZBrush here. And so I want to go just into some things involving nanomesh and a lot of the questions we get on usage of nanomeshes, and hopefully give you guys some information that you may not know on the functionality of it. And then once you guys get some questions start rolling in, I can switch over and answer those with you all. So hope everybody's still awake. Hope my stream holds up. It's Thanksgiving. Everybody's home. Everybody's sucking up bandwidth because all the kids are home watching Netflix. They're not watching ZBrush Live, though. They need to be doing that. That's what they need to be doing. All right, so if you guys are familiar what nanomesh is a functionality inside of ZBrush where you can take a mesh and you can populate another mesh's surface with that mesh. So if you guys are familiar with micromesh, which is the same thing, nanomesh is the upgraded version of micromesh. So as an example of this, let's say I have this bridge here, and I'll go through and demonstrate this a little bit more here in a second. But let's say I have this bridge, and let's just isolate this part here. So this is a model that's inside of ZBrush, and it's basically a shape, and then it's been flooded with other models. So if I turn off the nanomeshes here by going to the geometry tab, then going to nanomesh, and just turn nanomesh off here, because this is my original shape. So I've taken this low chunk of geometry, used the ZBrush to model this, and then I've gone through and I've had these other parts that I've converted to a nanomesh, and I've flooded these parts along the surface. So I've taken that geometry, and then I've added these kind of stones around the edges of it, and then on the top I've added some boards and some more stones. And you can see I've taken that simple model, and now I've added complexity to it. So something simple is now complex. And this is all using this nanomesh functionality. So I really like the nanomesh system in terms of creating surfaces. So let's say I don't want to texture something, I can use a nanomesh, which is taking a piece of geometry and multiplying it across the surface, and then I get a texture solution to my problem. So how do you create a nanomesh? Well, a nanomesh can be created from a subtool and can also be created from an existing insert mesh brush. So first, let's just create one straight up. So I have a tool here loaded in, and this contains some various pieces here. Now you'll notice a lot of these pieces that I have are a little bit low res, and this is going to come into play because we're going to take these parts and I'm just going to multiply them across the surface. So the more dense your part is, the more taxing it's going to be. But if you keep them pretty low, you're going to be able to flood an entire surface with it, and it's going to be able to handle or perform better inside of ZBrush. So here I have a simple blade of grass. So this is just a mesh that's just been extruded out, and I've just added a few rows of geometry in there. I have this Dynamesh object here. You'll notice that Dynamesh can also be used for this, so it's just any geometry inside of ZBrush can be used as a nanomesh. You're not really restricted in any way. So this one is a Dynamesh model here that just creates some kind of water effect. Then I've got a wood plank here, and I've got some stones. Now these stones were decimated down, so I modeled them, sculpted them, and then I went to the Z plugin tab up here. I used Decimation Master on them just to bring their polygon count down a little bit lower, because I'm basically going to flood hundreds of these on a mesh, and so if these are all 1,000,000 polygon objects, I'm now flooding 1,000,000 polygons times 100. So that's really, really going to be taxing. So keeping these low as possible is the best way for this. Then we got another rock and another rock. So I've got these meshes here, and I've just got them positioned. So I'm going to go through and just create first I'm going to create an insert mesh brush. And so to create an insert mesh brush, you just need to have subtools. You need to have the subtool oriented, how you want them to draw out on a surface. So for the grass here, I know I want the grass to draw out like this. So if my surface is down here, I want the grass to come up, like it's growing out of that surface. So I want to make sure I'm looking down on it, right? So this is when you think about how you're going to click on a model and drag, and it's going to draw that model out. This is going to draw that piece of grass right out of the surface. So I want to make sure my alignment is like this. And I'm going to go through all these and just make sure they're aligned in the correct position related to each other. So you can see these are going to draw out like this. Then the wood's going to draw out flat. The water's going to draw out like this. And then the grass is like that. So they're all aligned now. So now after you have them all rotated to your liking, I now just need to create that insert mesh brush. So I'm going to go to the brush palette up here. I'm going to go to the Create menu, and now I'm just going to click Create Insert Multimesh. Now, there's two insert mesh options here in the brush palette. You have insert mesh and insert multi-mesh. Insert mesh is just going to create one part from the subtool you have selected. Insert multi-mesh is going to look at all the subtools in that tool and create a different part for each one. So since this tool here has 6 different pieces, I want to use the create insert multi-mesh. So I'm going to click this button here, and you'll see it's generated a new brush at the top here, and I have all these parts. So if you guys tuned in, not last week, but the week before that, when we went through a bunch of the insert mesh stuff, this is the same process we talked about last week on just creating an insert mesh brush. So nothing really new here. Now I'm going to select my bridge object here, and I'm just going to isolate this top part quickly. And you can see I have my insert mesh brush selected. I've got my piece of geometry, and now, like normal, using an insert mesh brush, I could click and drag and start drawing these on the surface. Now I control the depth of these by going to the brush palette over here and going to the depth area and change my embed value, and they'll determine how much these pieces come off the surface. But you'll see if I wanted to populate this entire bridge, it's going to take a little while, right? I mean, I can come through and manually place every single one of these stones across this entire surface, but it's not really a workflow that's, fast for a production pipeline or just fast to get the result I want. So instead of just using this as a normal insert mesh brush, we can now turn this insert mesh brush into a nanomesh brush. Now you have to have an insert mesh brush created and then convert that insert mesh brush to a nanomesh brush. This is a process that has to happen. So you can't just go from your subtools that we had here with our bits and pieces and go straight to a nanomesh brush. You must first go to an IMM brush or an insert mesh brush, then go to a nanomesh brush. So taking these models, created that insert mesh brush. Now I'm going to go to the brush palette again, and directly under the insert mesh options here, there is a create nanomesh brush. And what this is going to do, it's going to look at all those insert mesh objects in that brush, and now it's going to give me a brush that's going to allow me to populate the polygon surfaces of a mesh. So I'm just going to click this now, and now it's going to create a new nanomesh brush. And you're going to notice that this isn't labeled a ZModeler brush when it's created. And you can see these are all the parts in it. So I still have my existing insert mesh brush, so I can come over here and select that. But now I also have this ZModeler brush that contains all these parts as nanomeshes. So a little bit confusing there, but that is the process to do this. Now after I have a nanomesh brush created, I can go back to my bridge over here. And the first thing I want to do with this bridge is I'm just going to select one of these parts. So I'm going to hit M on my keyboard, and I'm just going to select one of these rocks. So I'm just going to select rock 1 here. You can also select it from the IMM viewer bar here. And then I want to hover over one of my polys on the surface here. And you're going to see as I hover over it, I'm getting a context menu from the ZModeler brush here that's saying Insert Nanomesh a Poly. So this is going to insert a single nanomesh to the poly I'm hovering over. So if I click and drag, I'm going to get a nanomesh part added there. Now, one of the things with nanomesh that you'll notice is that this process looks like it still could take a while. I have to go to every poly and click. But the nanomesh functionality is built into the ZModeler brush. And with the ZModeler brush, you can change the targets in which an action can be performed to. So if I hover over this poly and press spacebar, you can see I'm going to get my ZModeler poly action menu here. You can see I have my action set to insert nanomesh, and my target is set to a single poly. So I can change this to different targets, and when I change it to different targets, it's going to determine how that nanomesh is going to be applied. So let's say I go to this flat island here. Now the flat island option is going to look at the poly I'm selecting, and then it's going to look at the polys around it, and they're going to look at the curvature of your mesh. So if I use this flat island here, it's going to look at all this flat area here, and it's going to apply a nanomesh to every single one of the polys here in this flat island. So if I click and drag on this, you're going to see I'm going to get a nanomesh applied across all those islands. So instead of going through and manually placing each one of these parts across the entire surface here, I've now used the ZModeler brush with that flat island target, and now in a single click I've applied the rocks all over the place. So this is the basic functionality of a nanomesh brush. So it's going to look at the topology of your mesh and then apply a part to every single poly in that topology. Now this is going to change if you divide this mesh too. So as an example of it changing, right now this mesh is pretty low. But let's say I go down to the Geometry tab here and open this up and now click Divide. So when I divide, it's going to divide this mesh up, right? It's going to give me another subdivision on it. And when you divide, it's going to increase the topology on your mesh. So that means that each of these polys here is going to be divided. And as we talked about just a second ago, that a nanomesh is going to look at every poly on the mesh. So when I click Divide, I'm now going to increase the amount of nanomeshes applied to that surface because I've divided up the topology. So nanomesh is always going to look at your polygons you have on the surface of your mesh. So now by dividing this low resolution model I had, I've increased the topology, and now I've doubled up the amount of nanomeshes there. So there's another thing with nanomesh just to watch out for when you're using it, is if your mesh is really dense and you try to apply a nanomesh to like the entire thing, remember it's going to apply a nanomesh part to every single poly that is on that mesh. And it's not it doesn't care if it's a triangle or a quad, as long as it is a poly, it's going to apply a new nanomesh instance to that. So you can easily, if you take Earthquake, and he's at 4 million polygons, and you try to apply a nanomesh across all of Earthquake, it's going to try to flood the entire 1 million polys of Earthquake with a nanomesh instance in each one of those polys. So it can get really heavy really quick. But that's just another thing to look at or remember when using nanomeshes. Now you'll notice after I drew this out, it kind of looks a little bit weird. Like I have one of these nanomeshes applied to every poly, but it's not really looking like a stone bridge like I had originally. So how do I get some variation on this? Well, if we go to the nanomesh tab, you have a whole bunch of different options here. And you can change a whole bunch of different things. So I can change the size of these nanomeshes here, and I can make them larger instantly. And since it's looking at this instanced object, it's changing all of them at once. I can change the width, I can change the length, and so you can play with these different sliders here until you get an effect you're looking for. This is why it's really handy for generating kind of like textural surfaces with meshes. So it's really, really nice. Now, if you're using any of these options up here, such as fit and fill, you're going to make sure your size is set to 1. It's going to look at that, and this is going to give you a constant kind of value too there. So you can see with fit on, it's gone through and looked at the size of the poly, and then it's fitting the mesh to that poly. So these areas through here that contained those slivers of geometry are now going to take that nanomesh and try to distort it to fit that poly surface. So you can see these are looking these strange little sliver effects here. So sometimes you may want that, sometimes you may not, because it's all going to be based on your topology separation and how much, the tessellation is on your mesh. So if you have fit on, you may not like the result you're looking for. So if you turn it off or switch it back to proportional, it's now going to apply the same size across everything. Now, in addition to this, you can change your offsets, so you can make them look random, and this will have those meshes, go away from the poly they're applied to, but they're still looking at that poly. Change the height, you can change the rotation of it, so if you want to add some rotation, you can do that, and you can rotate on each of the axes for the nanomesh there. You can also add variations to all these. So if you come over to the variation slider, you can start fiddling with this and then add a little rotation here, and it's going to start randomly generating rotation across all of them. So this is handy if you want to add a little bit of difference. So if you have one part and you want to extrude it across an entire surface, adding a little randomization through rotation will often give you a better result and not make it look so uniform. So there's some rotation there applied. Now I have a little more interesting effect with all these rocks. Along with the variations for the rotation, you always have variations for width, height, and width, length, and height. And if you set these to the same value, it's going to give you a constant offset. So if I just change the width variation here, you can see they're all going to get different widths. But if I come through and say change this to 30, and then change length to 30, and then change height to 30, now instead of getting this kind of inconsistent thing through it, it's just going to give me a global scale. So it's going to look at each of these, it's going to hold their overall size, and it's just going to scale it up or down by 30%. So it's basically locking the axes. And that option turns on automatically if you have these variation sliders typed into the same number. So if I change one of these to 10, you're going to see it's going to give me a different result. But if I change it to 30, now you're going to get these ones that are smaller and ones that are bigger, and it's just looking at that 30% disconnect in value to change those options. So another thing there that you may type in all these numbers and you're not figuring out, well, I wanted the height to variate 30, but I didn't want the length to variate 30, right? And so if you have all these the same number, it's going to do it in a global way rather than just looking at each of the offsets individually. So one thing there, that may be a little bit confusing there. All right, hold on, I'm going to hop over here for questions quick before I keep going on my tangents here. Edges disappearing. All right, so we got some with topology and also some copy and pasting stuff. So I'm going to get through this nanomesh really quick, and then we'll hit those. One other thing I want to talk about quickly with nanomesh, I'll do a streamlined version of this, is that after you have a nanomesh applied, you can also apply random distribution, and this will allow you to add different elements to it. So if I go to the random distribution here and toggle this, I'm going to be able to start flooding with randomly placed nanomeshes. So if I want that brick wall to look something like this, I can just change this random distribution and then adjust the seeds. And this is going to give me a random effect. So instead of adhering to that single nanomesh per poly, it's now going to randomly distribute those polys across that entire surface. So this is another handy thing for just adding variation. Now another thing with nanomesh 2 is that you can also take a nanomesh and apply another nanomesh on top of it. So let's say I have these rocks, and now I want to put a secondary rock across this. So I want 2 rocks applied to the surface. Well, if you try to do this normally with just, say, grabbing this rock 2 up here and then clicking and dragging to add a new nanomesh here, I'll go back to single target here, you're going to see that it's just going to replace it. So wherever I draw this out, it's just going to replace all the other nanomeshes on there. But what you can do is you can apply more than one nanomesh index to a surface. And to do this, you just need to hold down the Shift key as you draw it out. So if I come across this surface here and click and drag and hold down Shift, you can see it's going to apply a new rock to that entire surface. And the Shift key is basically looking at the polygroup that's applied to that surface. So adding this second one here, it's now applying across everything. So now I have 2 nanomeshes occupying that same space. And if I go to the nanomesh here, I have index 1 and index 0. And I can go to here to hide others so I can see these individually. So let's say I want these to be really tiny and maybe offset some from the surface. And then on the other ones, I want these to be a little bit smaller too. And turn off hide others so I can see them together. Maybe I want them a little bit fatter, but then I want them thin. So I'm going to offset them inward and then maybe down the height some. So you can start layering nanomeshes on your surface. And this is another way to create some interesting details with that. So the process for that again is just taking a surface, and if you drag it out holding Shift, it's going to apply that to the existing polygroup that exists on that surface. Then I can take another nanomesh part and draw that out and hold Shift, and it's going to add to it. And you can just come through and keep adding multiple nanomeshes to a surface. So for the bridge, you can see you can start layering up these different indexes, and you're going to get a different result. And then you can offset and vary these as much as you want to create different effects. One more thing I just want to hit on quick, and then we'll get to these questions quick, and then we'll probably return to nanomesh some. So here's another example of some nanomesh parts here. So this is different things that I have used for surfacing, so rocks, bricks, all sorts of different things, even some like thatched mud stuff through here. And so as an example of this, one of the things that I really like for texturing purposes is, say, wood. Let's say I have a model and I want to make it look like wood. So I've generated this low poly mesh here that just looks like this. So it's just some lines that have been extruded, and then I've added some things that look kind of like knots. So I'm just going to create this into a insert mesh brush quick. And then I'm going to turn that into a nanomesh. So now I have a new nanomesh brush that contains that wooden part. And now I have this little building here. And let's say I want to apply some wooden effects to it. So I'm going to go to solo here just so you can see this part. So I have these rafters. Once again, they're very low resolution here. So we're looking at cubes that have just been extruded in varying levels and then some twisted. So nothing really complex. You can see a lot of these surfaces are also just single polys of geometry. So they're not even divided in any way at all. So I can come across these surfaces, and let's say I want to populate everything with this color polygroup here. So I have that wood selected. I'm going to hover over one of these. I'm going to click and drag. And as I drag this out, I'm going to hold down Shift. And you can see now I have populated a wooden part across all those polygroups of that same color. Now I can go down to the nanomesh tab here, and I can change the size on this. But I'm going to come down here and do this random distribution and just crank this up. And you can see it's going to start putting wood everywhere. And you see, I start getting this effect, right? So now I have this kind of thing going on. Well, this looks great. It's got some wood areas here. I can add some random offsets in Z to kind of get more of that grain to pop out a little bit. So I got something like this where I'm seeing a little more grain in between. But you notice it's now going all over the place, right? So it's taking that poly and it's extruding out of the borders. And so instead of that nice kind of wood effect I had, I've got this kind of stylized house. It looks like a painting, but that's not what I want. So in the nanomesh tab, there is a clip option too, and this will look at the edges of those poly groups and attempt to clip the geometry. Now this will work for most of the surfaces. Sometimes you'll miss, so you can see it's missing over here. But you can see on these boards here, it's now clipped those edges, and now I have this nice kind of wood effect. Now you can also tell these ones in here are looking a little bit different, and this is based on their orientation. So in the nanomesh tab here, there's an alignment area. And in here you can set the alignment of how these nanomesh is going to be aligned to the surface. If you guys have more questions on the alignment, I can go through those as well. But I want to just get through this really quick and then answer some of these questions. So you can see as changing the alignment here. So if I go to, say, long edge, it's going to try to keep that nanomesh in the direction of the longest edge. So it's going to try to, for this part here, it's going to look at the longest edge of that poly, and it's going to try to put the nanomesh in this direction. And if I change this to, say, short edge, it's going to change it and try to get the nanomesh in that direction. So just changing these alignment options is going to determine how these nanomeshes are going to be applied to your surface. But as you can see, instead of going through and say maybe texturing this as wood, I can just use that piece of geometry and just now have this actually as geometry on my mesh, and now I have a wood surface generated. Then I can just bake that out, add some ambient occlusion to it, do some things like that, and it's done. So little trick there using nanomeshes for creating textures for models. So really handy functionality there. And I use this quite a bit to get different surfaces because it's fast, it's easy, and you have a lot of control of it after you have it generated. And you can always just turn it off if needed. So, all right. So we have a question asking when creasing, or when I have creased edges and then copy and paste UVs, my creasing will disappear. So this should be resolved in 4.8p2. Definitely check, make sure you're using the latest version of ZBrush, so ZBrush 4.8p2. And the creasing should retain. There was a bug where it was disappearing, but it should be retaining now with that. If not, definitely submit a support ticket to support.pixologic.com, and then we can get our developers to look at that and resolve it. But that one, if you have P2, it should have been resolved, but maybe something else is popping up. So definitely that would be a good question or a good ticket to submit on support.pixologic.com. So then we have another question here. So I want to retopo a sculpt in ZBrush. Can you walk through how you would go by doing this? So if you have, say, like a Dynamesh and you want to go through and retopo it. So this one's actually, it can be pretty complex or it can be pretty simple. So let's see here. We'll just grab this demo head here. I was going to go to Earthquake. Everybody laughs when I go to Earthquake. So we'll go to this one instead. All right, so let's say I have a finished model here. And we'll go ahead and we're going to just apply some quick painting to this one too. A fill object give, and then we're going to give... Let's go to the texture tab here and see what we got in here. So this will just be another tiered example of this. So let's grab a... Is there anything interesting in here that I can apply to this mesh quick? We'll go with these. We don't know why. We're going with these. All right. So I'm just going to apply a texture this quick, and for this I'm just going to use Spotlight. So in texture, I've just imported this texture map through Lightbox here. I'm now going to convert this to Spotlight by just clicking this. And now I have this kind of floating texture map here. I'm just going to position this around the eyes of this character here. I'm going to change down my opacity so I can see through the mesh. And then I'm going to switch to the standard brush here. I'm going to hit Z on my keyboard to hide that. And I'm going to go through and just paint with RGB. And this is just going to transfer this texture map here onto the poly paint of the model. So just adding some poly painting to the surface. So excellent. Look at that. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. All right. So it's just a demonstration. I just wanted to add some texture map to the initial surface of the mesh so we can transfer it later to our retopo. So inside of ZBrush, you have a few ways you can retopo a surface. The two ways that I usually end up using for items is first just going through and using ZRemesher. If your item is not going to be used for animation, if it's going to be a static object, ZRemesher does a really good job and you can protect the details back really quick. So as an example of the ZRemesher process, if I take the head here and duplicate it, so I just made a new version of the head here, and then we go down here to the Geometry tab, open up ZRemesher, and I'm going to set my target polygon count to say around 3. This is going to be based on like 1,000 polygons, so 3,000 polygons is what I'm looking for here. I'm going to keep adaptive on, and I'm just going to click ZRemesher. This is just going to look at the sculpting surfaces on the topology of the mesh here, and then ZRemesh this to give me new topology. And depending on where your target polygon count is, it's going to determine what kind of result you get out of it. So I got this as my result. So this is still a little bit too high for, say, something I want as a retopologized surface. So I'd come over to ZRemesher again, I'd turn half on, and I just ZRemesh one more time. This is going to go through and decrease the resolution by half. And you can do this as many times as you want. So if you refine that form once, you can just come in here and keep pressing this until you get something low enough to your likings. This is a handy process there. So let's say I'm now at 1,000 polygons. This might be pretty good for my resolution I'm looking for. So now I've just gone through and retopologized that surface. Now if it's for a static object, this is usually pretty much you're good. You can come through now and break this up into polygroups pretty quick if you want to apply some quick mapping to it. So you can use multiple things to generate polygrouping. So let's say I'm going to use slicing and just kind of slice this model up. So I'm going to grab the slice curve here. And I just want to, let's see here, we'll slice off the ears. Actually, we'll do this. We'll slice through part of the head. So we're going to unwrap this section, unwrap this middle section. We'll maybe probably do the base of the head here too. And the slice is going to give you a different result when establishing polygroups here. So it's going to be a faster process because it's going to have an edge to go through. So I could go through and hide the surface as well and then apply a new polygroup that way, but sometimes slicing is just a lot quicker. Now I know I want this mesh to be symmetrical, so I've done one side of the mesh here, so I don't have to slice the other side and try to line it up. So I go to deformation here, I can mirror it. You always want to have your mirrored surface when you're looking front on a model to be on the left side. It's going to take what's over on the left side and go over to the right side. Then I go to the Modify Topology tab here and do a mirror and weld. And now I have my mesh broken up into these polygroups here. So I've gone through, used ZRemesher to create quick topology. Now once again, this is for if you have a mesh that isn't going to be animated. So if it's just something static, this is what I'd recommend doing for that. Now after I have this, I can generate quick UVs on this. I can go to the Z plugin tab here, I can go to the UV master tab here, turn polygroups on, and quickly unwrap this. So now I've got 4 polygroups out of that. Now I can do my baking from my high resolution model to the low resolution model in another application if I want. So I can just export out the head, export out this head, and then do the bake elsewhere. So say use X normal or hand plane. So there's different ways you can do that with the baking your meshes. If you want to do it inside of ZBrush, basically you need subdivisions on a model, and that will allow you to generate a normal map from the low resolution to the high resolution. So you just want to now divide the mesh that we just set up with our low topology, and also set up with polygroups, and also set up with those quick UVs. So I'm going to hit Control D on my keyboard to divide this up. And you want to at least divide it up to the same resolution that your original mesh had. And that's going to allow you to capture those sculptural details. So for this one, I want to get up close to that 100,000 point. And so ending up at 312 was pretty much the closest there. And I'm going to make sure I have that other one turned on so I can see both of them together. And since I have poly painting on this mesh, I also want to make sure that I have poly painting turned on for the mesh I'm projecting to. So the head that I just low-resed out of the ZRemesher and then generated UVs. And so now with that one, I can go down to the project option here. I'm going to change my distance to 0.1 and click project all. And this is going to look at anything that has that eyeball icon on. So it's going to take my one mesh and project the second one to it. And when that's completed, you can see this is what I have. So I have this model. And if I go up, and I have this model. And if you look through, as I cycle through these, you're not going to see much difference, right? So with using ZRemesher, it's going to look at the surface topology of your mesh. So it's going to give you that cage. It's pretty much going to fit around that entire model. And then dividing it up and projecting it back, you're going to pretty much capture all those details. So the only thing you're going to see change here as I'm going up and down, cycling through these, is basically the active point count. So the original one was at 106, and this one's now at 312. Now this mesh here that I've just retopologized and resurfaced, given UVs and everything else, has subdivisions. So I can scroll down to subdivision 1, and there's my low res, there's my high res. If I want to generate my map out of this, just want to make sure I'm the highest subdivision, go down to the texture map tab here, go to create, do new from polypaint, which is going to take the vertex coloring on the mesh and transfer it to a texture. And there I have my map there. You can export that out with clone texture, and then it'll appear in the texture palette, and you can export it out here. And you'll see with this texture map on, I can scroll down to the low resolution of this. So there's my wireframe, and my texture map is applied. So that is one quick process there using just ZRemesher to take a Dynamesh sculpt, generate new topology out of it, unwrap it, then project the details from the high resolution back to the low resolution one, and then generate your map. Now, if you want to generate a normal map, that's another easy step as well. So same process almost as coming to the texture map tab and just clicking new from polypaint. You just want to go down to the subdivision that you want to project to. So I'm going to go to the lowest one. Then we're going to open up the normal map tab here, and we're just going to click this create normal map. It's going to look at the highest subdivision and the subdivision you're on. This is just the default functionality for this. There's some other things you can do using morph targets if you like. And then I'm just going to click create normal map, and this is going to go through and now generate a normal map for my mesh as well. And then once again, I can take this and export out. So now I have a diffuse texture that's relating to the polypaint that I had in my original mesh, and I have a normal map that's now been generated in tangent space that is based on the sculptural details from the low resolution to the high resolution. And then you can export these out and you're good to go, especially for game stuff. For displacement, you can just do create displacement map, and this will do a similar process but with the displacement. And so now you've generated a diffuse, a displacement map, and a normal map on this low resolution model. So option 1. All right, so option 2 is we have our original mesh here, and the other option I'd like to do, especially if it's going to be animated or you need more control over your topology inside of ZBrush, is to append a ZSphere and then use the topology options with the ZSphere to retopologize the surface. So to do this process, I have my original tool here, and now I'm just going to click append, and now I'm just going to select a ZSphere object. And when the ZSphere object comes in, it should be in the middle of your mesh here. So I can see it there, and there's my head. If I turn on transparent, you can see this is what it looks like. Get a quick drink of water here. And now with the ZSphere selected, I want to go down here to the bottom. I'm going to open up the topology tab here, and I want to click this edit topology button. And it's going to take that ZSphere and it's going to turn it into a topology object. And so what this means is now I'm going to be able to plot points on the ZSphere and then have it staple or snap to the head. So I'm going to turn edit topology on. Now it has been a little while since I've done this, so bear with me if it starts going crazy. So with this, I can just click on a surface and turn on symmetry as well. And as I click, it should edit a point. And if I click again, it's going to add another point to that. Now the first point is always going to try to come off the starting Z-sphere here. So oftentimes you may not want that. So you're going to have to just first click through one of these and then delete the original. And now you should be able to Z-sphere the surface here. And let's see how this goes. Hold on, let's fix this. Now it has been a while, so there may be something here that's not correct. Let's get out of topology quick. Let's size this Z-sphere down some. There you go, that's better. Back to edit topology, back to draw. Click, there we go. And so as you do this, you're going to start generating topology on your surface. Now to select the Z-sphere part, you want to just basically click on it while holding control, and that's going to select it, and then you can start drawing out your lines. So you can come through and start drawing this out and then go back through, and you want to just go through and hit all these different points. So now you can see I'm starting to generate the topology on my mesh like this. So I come through and start topologizing this, and you want to notice that every time you click, it's going to start from whatever the red circle is on. So you can see when I click next, it's going to start there. So you want to hit control to start your point, and then when you click, it's going to generate it. And basically the process is going through and just doing this kind of effect all around your mesh to get that topology. And it does kind of, after you do it for a little bit, it will start to flow pretty quick. So you can actually come through and start retopologizing pretty quick. It's always going to snap initially on the surface of the mesh too. So it's one of those things. It's much easier, say if you make a mistake, so say I didn't want this topology line here, come through and hold down Alt and click, now remove it, and then select your starting point and redraw it. There is a slide option, but for me it's faster just to redraw the point. And we'll go and let's see how fast we can do this. It's been a little while. It's been a little while. Crazy topology. Now, for topology 2, what I usually end up doing is I'll start from the extents of the mesh, so generating places where I want seam lines to be. So I know for like a head model, usually the back of the head is where you want that seam to be. So coming through and establishing that area there. And you can add as many, rows of topology as you want. Triangles are fine too, especially in this method. So don't be, oftentimes nowadays you don't find many people that are stressing over, oh, I had to put up triangle there. Because it all gets converted to triangles anywhere in a game engine. So this can continue for a while. You can definitely go through and start topologizing for days. So I'm going to just close this up really quick to give me a surface that I can project to, rather than you guys watch me topologize this head. And if you're doing this for real, that'd take a lot more time. Make sure I can establish all those loops around the faces. But I just wanted to get you guys to see the process on how to do this. And then after you're good with your topology, if you want to preview what it will look like, you can hit A on your keyboard. And if you activate solo, you'll see the topologized version of your mesh here. Now with the addition in 4R8, when you activate an adaptive skin, it's going to automatically go through and turn it into a dynamesh. So if you want to get out of that, just set your dynamesh resolution or your density down to 1, and now it's going to give you your geometry here. So if you have this up, it's going to start looking at it and then looking at the dynamesh option as well. So you can now take a ZSphere basically and convert it to a dynamesh if you want. So you could use this process to generate topology to sculpt on later. So you could come across, append a ZSphere, add say a shoulder pad or a shirt to your model, and then instantly convert it to a dynamesh. But if you don't want that to happen, just make sure that dynamesh resolution slider is off, and then you can adjust the density there, and now you're going to get new mesh topology out of that. And then after you're happy with that, you can just do make adaptive skin, and that's going to now give you a new tool up here. And now you can append this to your scene. So now I have my head here and my original head. And if I put them together, where are you at, head? You see it's sitting right in the middle of the mesh there. So at this stage, you do that same process that I just did with the ZRemesher. So I'd want to divide this mesh up and then project the original head details back onto it. So to do that, we can just go to the geometry tab here, divide this up. And you can divide it up to as many polygons as you want. And then we'll go back to the project option here. I'm going to set this to 0.1. Now this is going to give a cleaner result if your entire mesh has been retopologized. Right now I only have this part here, so I may get some ray misses on the side here. Make sure I have my colorize on if I want to transfer that poly painting to it. And remember, you want to also make sure your active point counts is similar to your original one as well. And then we're going to do project all on that. And this is going to transfer the details from that high resolution one to my newly generated mesh. And I can go up and down my subdivisions like so. And if I retopologize the face or those eyes, I would have had them captured here. But now you can see I have this topology. It's been retopoed, and I have this as my geometry. And I now have projected those details back. And then you can do the same process we did with the ZRemesher version. So I can take that, unwrap it, set my polygroups if I want to do polygroup splitting for that unwrap, and then project the details, and then calculate your neural maps like so. Does that help at all? Dry otter? Does that give you enough information there? Yes, so you can potentially do that too. It's another little thing here. So let's take the head here. So Dryader is asking, well, is there a way I can use ZRemesher and then fix the topology? So for that process, you can. So let's say I have the head here, and we're going to head and we're going to duplicate this, and now we're going to ZRemesh this. Wait for it. And we're going to do half on that and ZRemesh this a few more times. So let's get low. And if you have symmetry on, you're going to get a different result with ZRemesher. So I didn't have symmetry on. You'll notice that I didn't have a symmetrical line. If you have symmetry on, when you use ZRemesher, it's going to look at both halves and it's going to make that symmetrical. It'll also speed up the ZRemesher process, because basically what it's going to do, it's going to take your model, just take half of it, ZRemesh it, and then stick it back together. So if you want a faster ZRemesh, definitely turn symmetry on, and it'll even look at, if you have X, Y, and Z symmetry on too, so you can get like a quarter of your model ZRemeshed and have it repeat all over the place. So I'm going to ZRemesh this back down to that low version there. So there we go. So let's say I have this, and I like everything but this nose, right? Really don't want that nose. So we're going to do the same thing again. So I have this topology here. I'm just going to clone this quick so it lives up top here. And I'm going to append in a ZSphere again. So I have my original head, and if I turn on transparency, there's the ZSphere. I'm going to scale this down once again because it's a little bit too big there. Make it smaller. There we go. And now... it's been a little while since I've done this too, so I hope this works. We're going to go to the topology area here, and where we clicked that edit topology last time to start drawing our topology, we can select this button here that says select topo. Now you'll notice that I did clone that mesh out up here into the tool, because when you use the select topo button, it's going to look at that quick pick menu here, and you're not going to be able to pick it from your subtool, so you want to make sure you clone it out. And in here I have that head one, so now I can select that one. And you'll see as I selected that, it's going to go through and grab the topology from that mesh and now apply that to that ZSphere. So that ZSphere has now been turned into this. So it's sped up. Does this make sense there, Otter? That's sped up and now generated geometry from that mesh to help me with this topology. So now I can go to edit topology here, and I can come through and I can edit these. So let's say I don't like that nose, and come through and make sure symmetry's on here. Hold down Alt. Now sometimes you may have to toggle your lines here to do this. It has been a little bit since I messed with this. And watch now, it's not going to work. Where'd you go? ZSphere. Be careful when you click on Alt, as I just did that and selected a subtool. So let's go through here and delete these points. If I can select my subtool. Jumping around, jumping around. And if the topology wants to be happy here, I swear this works. Well, it may not work anymore. Anyway, the process is that you'd edit the topology, and then with the topology being edited, with it being active, it sometimes may want you to come through and do this edit topo one more time here. So I can select them. There we go. Make sure you're in draw mode. That would help. So I have the topology. I'm in edit topology. Make sure you're in draw mode. And then now I can come through and I can start editing the existing topology on my surface. And so I can now do that process again, where I can come through and start drawing the topology on my mesh here, and just tailoring these parts through here. So now I can come through and refine the nose here, giving a little more topology to that area. I told you it's been a while since I've topologized. So there you go. So we now fix that nose, and then once again we go to the adaptive skin option here. We can preview that, go to solo, change that dynamic resolution down to 0, and change that density down. And you can see now I have that topology there. And I still go back in and edit it as well, so I can get out of preview and go to edit topology. Had some crazy triangles going on here. So yes, you can go back and forth and do that process to edit topology on your meshes. And then after you're happy with that, just do that make adaptive skin, and it's going to give you a new surface here. And then you can take that and apply that to your model. So you probably want to clean up these ears too if you're going through and doing the retopology. And then just append that back in, and then do the process that we went through for the ZRemesher. So you can do it with after you have your low-res mesh, you can definitely use ZModeler on it too. So as long as it doesn't have subdivisions on it, I can definitely come in and select the ZModeler brush and start, using that to deform my surfaces too. Sometimes even with simple things, so say I had the original head And maybe all I wanted to change for the topology was to add an edge loop through here. So I can come through and add that edge loop there. And then you can go back and just reproject it. So maybe that might be the only thing you'd really want to modify on that ZRemesh topology. You can also use the close holes option too. So let's say you didn't really like these ears. I can come through and hide, say, that ear geometry there. I'm just going to hide all this through here. Yeah, we'll get the rest of these too. Be careful when you're doing that because you're going to start hiding other parts on your model. Because it's going all the way through. It helps sometimes to turn on double-sided. And I can delete that. Where are you at? Delete hidden. And now I can use something like, say, close holes on this. And generate, new topology on that. And then now project this mesh. So all sorts of things you can do there to change your topology on the fly. You can add different edge loops in there with ZBrush as well to get more resolution and then project that back. So all sorts of different things there. So question about dynamic subdivision. So dynamic subdivision just allows you to preview meshes without subdivisions. So if you'll notice, when we was going through the nanomesh options and even using the ZModeler brush or maybe using insert mesh brushes, you're not going to be able to use these on pieces of models that have subdivisions. So if I take this mesh here and divide it up and now say try to use the insert mesh, let's try the model kit brush here and grab this and try to draw on the surface, you're going to get this pop up. So the mesh has subdivisions, you cannot use an insert mesh object on it. So what dynamic subdivision will allow you to do is allow you to take a model, you can then preview it with dynamic subdivision. So if we go to dynamic and turn this on, I now have a smooth subdivided slider here, which is basically going to do the same thing that you're getting when you click divide. So I can come here and change this up, and this is basically going to correlate to a subdivision. So now I'm getting the look of that model being subdivided, but now I can still use processes inside of ZBrush that won't work if there is subdivisions. So this is a big thing there for just kind of seeing things like that. It also gives you this low-res cage now, since it's just a dynamic mode. So when you're modifying the surface here, so say I get the move brush and start pulling surfaces out, what I'm actually changing is this version of the mesh. And it's just giving me the look of that high-resolution version. So this is sometimes a good way to kind of find shapes and find forms, and you're not really manipulating that million polygon surface, you're just manipulating the low-res one here and just previewing it as though it had millions of polygons. Now you can also convert the dynamic to traditional subdivisions at any time. So the process to do this is just make sure you have this active, and then you come over here and you can click apply. And this is now going to take those dynamics, and now it's going to give you a model with traditional subdivisions on it. So you can see here, this now has 4 subdivisions. So if I go up and down, you can see there's the lowest, there's the highest. And if I delete lower, you're going to see that's what the real topology of the mesh looks like. So dynamics is just a way to speed up workflows. Modeling, it's really good with ZModeler because ZModeler wants to work on that really low resolution topology, and you can preview your meshes with ZModeler at that high resolution. Another example of this, let's say I take the star, and I'm just going to turn it into a cube here. And now let's go back to that dynamic subdivision area. This is one of my favorite things with dynamic, is you have this Q grid option here. So let's say this is my cube. I can update that slider there, so it's getting the smooth effect. But let's say I want some nice bevels or some edges to this. So I can activate this Q grid option, and what Q grid does is it looks at these edges of your model, and it's basically going to put edge lines in there. So it's adding insert edge loops around that surface. So if I have Q grid of 2 and I hit apply, this is what it's doing. So it's taking edges and bumping them to the surface. So instead of me going through my mesh with, say, normal dynamic subdivision, and then saying, let's say I want this edge to be harsh here, I go to my ZModeler brush, and I can insert an edge lap here. Where are you at? Where are you at? Let me get off the poly. Give me that edge. So I could edge bump, so I could take my edge here and add it there, and as I'm adding it, what I'm doing is just adding this edge, and you see as it's getting closer to that top one, it's giving me a harsher transition. So I could come through on my model and just keep adding edge loops to get that tailored effect. But if I use this Q grid option, it's going to go through and do it for me, and then I can change the coverage on this, I can change what kind of bevel I want, and so I can start getting these different effects on the model. And this is still looking at that low resolution of the mesh. So if I turn dynamic off, this is what my model actually is. But now with this, I can start using the ZModeler brush, and I'm going to start getting these nice angles to it. So instead of that flat looking surface, I can now come through and get these nice bevel edges and boxes, and I can just freely model and preview what this mesh is going to look like at that resolution. So this one's another one that I use quite a bit to just come through and make geometry with the ZModeler brush. And just go through and just turn this Q grid option on, and it gives me these nice kind of hard surfaces that have these nice bevels. And it's still just working on this lower one. So it's just previewing it in this higher resolution. And then I can convert it later if needed. Just gives you a lot of flexibility in building and designing and figuring things out. All right, so let's see else what we got here for questions. So we're getting close to the end of the time here. I saw a few more questions here that I want to answer, though. Yeah, so we had a comment about using ZRemesher with creep groups on, too. That's another great way to keep the polygroups, especially if you have them already blocked out in your Dynamesh. And then when you do your retopology, you'll have these nice polygroups generated. This is not all possible in ZBrushCore, so the ZSphere stuff is in there, but I do not believe the topology options are, so you won't be able to do the topology. ZRemesher as well is not in ZBrushCore. So Ollie, if you want to store, so you have a bunch of material, alphas loaded in, so the question is asking, is there a way to store all the alphas in case you close ZBrush and want to recover a set of alphas? There currently is not. So whatever alphas you have here that are loaded in, say you load them in automatically, when you restart ZBrush, they're not going to be remembered. You can have these in the default alpha folder. So if I go to, say, save as here, and go back to that directory again, into the forbidden ZData folder, you can save them in here, and then they'll be there, and so there should be alphas there. Let me just... So these are where all the alphas are. So if you put them in there, they're going to stay in there. You also have a ZStartup alphas folder too. But if you just load them in manually, there's no way they're going to stay. If you restart ZBrush, they're going to vanish and go away unless you export them out to that folder so they're there the next time you load up. You can embed them in as a brush, as you mentioned. So if I come through and take them and then embed them into a brush, as you mentioned, so let's say a multi-alpha brush. So like the chisel brush is basically, these can all be alphas instead of 3D. And then when you save that brush, they'll be remembered. But if you just import in an alpha, it's not going to remember which ones you have loaded the next time you start up. And that's pretty much the same for textures too. So even if you save a project, the alphas that are in that list are going to revert. Well, I think that's about it, guys. So definitely, if you have any other questions, make sure you go to Twitter and type in the hashtag AskZBrush. Dry Otter, let me know if that, it appears that the information on the ZRemeshing helped. If not, let me know, and we'll see if we can cover it again maybe next week, or the week after next is when I'll go. So, yeah, try using that process on that hand, as you were saying. And so take your hand, just generate the topology with ZRemesher, and then go back in and rebuild it. Make sure you're in draw mode, as we learned. If you're in Move Scalar and Edit, you're not going to be able to edit that topology, so make sure you're in draw mode. So we're going to go back over to Chrome here real quick and just do one more rundown. So once again, if you have any other questions related to ZBrush pipelines or processes, use the hashtag AskZBrush on Twitter. Once a week, I'll go through and look at these and try to answer the questions that can be answered in short videos. There was another one that was here that involved this process here. So I'm going to hit on this really quick. I'm going to do a video on this too. But insert edge loop here, you can see when you're using it and you hold down shift, it'll like switch angles. The cause of this is because you're working on single-sided geometry. If you give this mesh thickness, then this edge is going to be able to find where it needs to flow, and then it'll work correctly. But if you're working on anything that is single-sided, this is what's going to happen if you hold down shift. So just be wary of that. ZBrush likes to work with solid meshes more than single-sided meshes, especially with the ZModeler brush. So if you run anything like this, it's because your mesh isn't solid. So you take this, whole thing here, go to ZModeler, do an extrude all polygons, and then you can come through and edit that edge loop where you want it, and then you just remove the excess topology layer that you added to give it thickness. So that is the answer for that one there, and I'll be doing a video on that too. And then after these videos are done, you can just go to our YouTube channel here and just do a search for AskZBrush, and they'll also be on ZBrushLive.com. Once again, if you have any things, or I have told you to go and submit a support ticket at Pixologic. So if you find out that topology brush is not doing retopology and you've got edit mode on and it's still not working, definitely submit a support ticket on Pixologic.com, but it seems that if it's in edit mode, it should work. If you're in draw mode, it should be fine. So that is it. Thank you all for showing up, and that's it. Hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving if you're celebrating, and do a lot of ZBrush turkeying. So make sure you ZBrush the turkey with all the fixings. Remember that. All right, so Paul will be back next week for his Did You Know That? And once again, Paul takes requests. He has a little poll that runs up every week too, so you can log in and vote on what you want to see him demonstrate next. I'm kind of more freeform, so we'll start out with something that I've received a lot of support tickets for, I've seen a lot of questions about, and then we'll navigate into the questions you guys ask. So hope you all have a great holiday in the U.S. here, and thanks for showing up. Thanks.